San Francisco's skyline glittered under the late afternoon sun, its glass towers reflecting the restless shimmer of the bay. The city buzzed with the energy of the annual real estate tech conference, held in a sleek, modern high-rise perched on the waterfront. The air inside the conference hall was thick with ambition. Sharp-suited investors, tech entrepreneurs, and developers networked furiously, their voices a low hum of deal-making and posturing. At the center of it all stood Lucas Grant, a 30-year-old white American billionaire, whose lean frame and piercing blue eyes drew attention as much as his reputation did. His pale skin, lightly freckled from years spent outdoors, contrasted with the crisp black suit he wore, tailored to perfection. Lucas was the mastermind behind a sprawling coastal complex project, a visionary blend of luxury residences and cutting-edge tech infrastructure that promised to redefine San Francisco's skyline. But beneath his confident exterior, tensions simmered. Whispers of a hostile takeover by Claudia Reed. A formidable rival had reached him days ago, and the stakes were higher than ever. Lucas needed a break from the conference's suffocating intensity. Slipping away from a panel discussion, he wandered into the city, drawn to the quieter streets of the Mission District. There, tucked between a vintage bookstore and a mural-covered taqueria, he found a small coffee shop called The Drifting Bean. Its warm, dimly lit interior smelled of roasted coffee and fresh pastries, a stark contrast to the sterile polish of the conference venue. Behind the counter stood Elena Ruiz, a 28-year-old African-American woman whose deep brown skin glowed under the soft overhead lights. Her hair, styled in tight curls that framed her face, bounced slightly as she moved with practiced ease, steaming milk and pulling espresso shots. Elena was more than a barista. She was a poet, her soul woven into words she scribbled in a worn notebook during breaks. Tonight, she was preparing to read at the shop's open mic, a monthly event that drew a small but loyal crowd of dreamers and artists. Lucas ordered a black coffee, his voice low and distracted as he scanned his phone for updates on Claudia's latest moves. Elena handed him the cup, her fingers brushing his briefly, and he looked up, caught off guard by her warm, unguarded smile. She said, "You look like you're carrying the world's weight," her tone light, but her dark eyes sharp with curiosity. Lucas chuckled, disarmed. "Just a few skyscrapers," he replied, and for the first time that day, he felt the knot in his chest loosen. They talked briefly, small, easy exchanges about the city, the coffee, the way the fog rolled in like a guest who never announced their arrival. Lucas learned that Elena had grown up in Oakland, her childhood shaped by the rhythm of poetry slams and the struggle of making ends meet. Her skin, a rich mahogany, seemed to hold stories of resilience, and her voice carried a cadence that felt like music. Lucas, with his fair complexion and privileged upbringing in Marin County, was drawn to her authenticity and lack of pretense. He hesitated when she mentioned the open mic, then decided to stay. The open mic began at 8, and the coffee shop became a haven of raw emotion. Locals filled the mismatched chairs, their faces lit by flickering candles on wooden tables. Elena took the stage, a small platform in the corner barely raised, and read her poetry. Her words were a tapestry of freedom and fear, weaving images of starless nights and unbroken horizons. Lucas sat in the back, his coffee long forgotten, captivated by how her voice trembled with vulnerability, yet burned with defiance. Lines about standing at the edge of the world, unafraid of the fall, lingered in his mind. Her African-American heritage shone through in the rhythm of her words, rooted in a legacy of struggle and triumph, though she never named it explicitly. Lucas, whose pale skin and wealth had shielded him from such depths, felt a pull. He couldn't explain a need to know her to understand the fire behind her words. After her reading, they talked again, this time outside the shop, where the night air carried the bay's salt. Elena's laughter was soft but infectious, and Lucas found himself sharing more than he intended about the pressure of his project, the weight of expectations, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who only saw his wealth. Elena listened, her dark eyes steady, offering no judgment. They walked along the waterfront, the city's lights dancing on the waves. The conversation turned to dreams, hers of publishing a poetry collection, his of building something that outlasted him. The night blurred into hours, and before long, they were at his rented beachfront loft, the sound of crashing waves filling the silence. Their connection was immediate, electric. Lucas's hands, pale against Elena's rich brown skin, traced her arms as they kissed, the contrast, striking yet unimportant in the heat of the moment. It wasn't about their differences. It was about how her laughter made his chest ache, and his quiet intensity made her feel seen. They spent the night tangled in each other, the world outside reduced to the rhythm of their breathing and the ocean's distant roar. For Lucas, it was a release from the relentless pressure of his life. It was a moment of surrender for Elena to something she hadn't dared hope for, a connection that felt real, even if fleeting. The next morning, Lucas woke to find Elena gone, her side of the bed cool. A note on the nightstand scrawled in her looping handwriting read, "Thank you for listening. We could meet again under the same stars." He smiled, tucking the note into his pocket, unaware that their night would set in motion a chain of events neither could control. Back at the conference, Claudia Reed, a white woman with sharp green eyes and a reputation for ruthlessness, watched Lucas from across the room. Her investigators had already flagged Elena's name, and Claudia's mind churned with plans. She saw Lucas's distraction as a weakness, an opening to tighten her grip on his project. She didn't yet know that Elena, the poet with the fearless voice, would become more than a passing threat. She would become the key to unraveling everything. The conference hall was a hive of activity, but Lucas's thoughts drifted to Elena. Her poetry echoed in his mind, lines about shadows and courage that reflected his buried fears. He tried to focus on the panel discussions, but Claudia loomed. She approached him during a break, her smile as polished as her tailored blazer. "You seem distracted, Lucas," she said, her tone laced with something sharper than concern. "Big week ahead. Hope you're ready." He nodded, brushing her off, but her words lingered like a warning. Meanwhile, Elena returned to her routine at the Drifting Bean, her mind replaying the night with Lucas. She hadn't expected to feel so much so fast. His pale skin and blue eyes had caught her attention, but his quiet vulnerability stayed with her. She'd grown up in a world where trust was hard-earned, where her African-American identity often meant navigating spaces that felt unwelcoming. Lucas, with his easy charm and privileged ease, was from a different world, yet he'd listened to her poetry with a genuine hunger. She shook off the memory, focusing on the espresso machine, but a part of her wondered if she'd see him again. As days passed, Lucas threw himself into negotiations, fending Claudia's maneuvers. She relentlessly leveraged her network to sway investors and spread doubts about his leadership. Her team dug into his personal life, uncovering his late-night walk with Elena. Claudia saw an opportunity. She didn't know Elena, but knew how to weaponize a story. Whispers began circulating among the conference attendees. Lucas was distracted, reckless, caught up with a barista, who might be more than she seemed. The rumors were vague, but damaging, painting Elena as a potential liability. Elena, unaware of the storm brewing, kept writing. Her poems grew fiercer, fueled by the memory of Lucas's hands, the way he'd looked at her, like she was the only person in the world. She didn't know that Claudia's investigators were already piecing together her life, her poetry readings, her shifts at the coffee shop, her quiet dreams. Nor did she know that a single night by the sea had already begun to shift the trajectory of her life, pulling her into a world of power and betrayal she'd never asked to enter. The San Francisco skyline faded into a haze of fog as Lucas Grant navigated the labyrinth of his coastal complex project. Boardrooms buzzed with tension, each meeting a chess match against Claudia Reed's calculated moves. Her team had escalated their efforts, leaking subtle doubts to investors about Lucas's focus. He sat through another late-night strategy session, his jaw tight, his mind only half present. The memory of Elena Ruiz's poetry lingered, her words about standing against unseen forces echoing in his thoughts. He hadn't seen her since their night together, but her note tucked in his wallet felt like a talisman grounding him amid the chaos. At the Drifting Bean, Elena worked her usual shift, the rhythm of steaming milk and grinding coffee beans, a steady counterpoint to her racing thoughts. She hadn't expected Lucas to stay in her mind this way, his quiet intensity contrasting with the guarded world she knew. Her poetry notebook tucked behind the counter was filling faster now, each line sharper, as if their night by the sea had unlocked something inside her. She was drafting a new poem about fleeting connections, about how a single moment could burn bright enough to cast shadows. But the weight of her routine bills rent the grind of survival kept her grounded. She couldn't afford to dream too long about a billionaire who'd likely already forgotten her name. Claudia Reed, meanwhile, was orchestrating her next move. From her corner office overlooking the bay, she reviewed reports from her investigators. They'd tracked Lucas's movements, piecing together his late-night walk with Elena. Claudia didn't care about Elena personally. She was just a tool, a way to unsettle Lucas. She crafted a narrative over a glass of Pinot Noir. Elena was a cunning opportunist, a romantic spy sent to distract Lucas and weaken his grip on the project. The story was flimsy, but Claudia knew perception mattered more than truth in their world. She instructed her team to seed the rumor among key investors, spreading it like wildfire through the conference circuit. Elena noticed the shift before she understood it. A regular at the coffee shop, a tech journalist with a knack for gossip, lingered at the counter one morning. He said, "You've been keeping interesting company," his smirk too knowing. Elena frowned, brushing it off, but the comment stuck. Later that week, she found an email in her inbox, sent from an anonymous account. The subject line was blank, but the message was chilling. "If you stay with him, your child won't be safe." Her stomach dropped. She wasn't pregnant. At least she didn't think so. But the threat felt like a blade pressed to her throat. She deleted the email, but the words lingered, sowing doubt. Who knew about her night with Lucas? And why would anyone care? Days later, Elena missed her period. Panic crept in, quiet, but persistent. She bought a pregnancy test, then another, each confirming what she hadn't dared to believe. She was carrying Lucas's child. The realization was a strange mix of fear and wonder, but the anonymous email cast a long shadow. She tried to reach Lucas, leaving a hesitant voicemail, but his response was curt and distracted, a text about being swamped with work. His coldness stung, though she knew he was under pressure. She'd read about his project in the news, the whispers of a takeover. Still, his distance felt like a rejection, and the email's threat loomed larger in her mind. Claudia's rumors gained traction. At a gala for the city's elite investors murmured about Lucas's indiscretions. A board member pulled him aside, warning him to keep his personal life out of the spotlight. Lucas bristled, dismissing the gossip, but the pressure was mounting. He hadn't seen Elena since their night together, but he couldn't shake the memory of her voice poetry and how she'd made him feel alive. He wanted to call and hear her laugh again, but every moment was consumed by damage control. Claudia's team had leaked doctored photos to a tabloid showing Lucas and Elena leaving the coffee shop together, the caption hinting at a scandal. The board was livid, and Lucas's temper flared. He confronted Claudia at the gala, his voice low but sharp. "This is low even for you," he said. She only smiled, her eyes cold. "Business is business, Lucas. You should know that." Elena, meanwhile, grappled with her own choices. The anonymous email had come from a burner account which was untraceable, but its threat felt real. She imagined a life for her unborn child, one free from the shadows of power plays and corporate games. Lucas's world with its wealth and intrigue felt like a trap. She didn't know if the threat came from Claudia or someone else, but she couldn't risk staying to find out. She packed a small bag, left a note for her boss at the Drifting Bean, and boarded a bus to Portland. The city, with its gray skies and quiet rivers, felt like a place to disappear to rebuild. She didn't tell Lucas she couldn't. His last text, a brusque, "Can't talk now," had sealed her decision. She'd raise the child alone, protect them from whatever darkness followed him. Elena found a job in Portland, at a small bookstore cafe, a cozy spot nestled among brick buildings and dripping evergreens. She rented a one-bedroom apartment, its walls bare, but for her poetry, which she wrote late into the night. The words came faster now, fueled by her fears, hopes, and the weight of the life growing inside her. She began submitting poems under a pseudonym, E. Ruiz, to local journals, her voice carving out a space in the city's literary scene. Each line was a rebellion against the fear that had driven her from San Francisco, a way to reclaim her power. Lucas, back in San Francisco, felt the void Elena left behind. He didn't know why she'd vanished. Her phone was disconnected, her shifts at the coffee shop filled by someone new. He told himself it was better this way, that she was a distraction he couldn't afford. But at night, when the city's lights felt too bright, he'd reread her note, tracing the loops of her handwriting. Claudia's takeover attempt was gaining ground, and the board's confidence in him was slipping. He fought harder and negotiated smarter, but a part of him wondered what he was fighting for. Once his dream, the coastal complex, felt hollow without someone to share it with. Elena's pregnancy progressed in secret, her days filled with the hum of the cafe and the quiet joy of feeling her baby move. She named her Lila, a name that felt like a promise of light, but the anonymous email never left her mind, a reminder that the past could find her. She didn't know that Claudia's investigators had tracked her to Portland, their reports feeding Claudia's growing obsession. Nor did she know that Lucas, despite his cold exterior, was haunted by her absence, his heart caught between the empire he was building and the woman he couldn't forget. Portland's rain fell steadily, cloaking the city in a soft gray haze. Elena Ruiz had settled into a small apartment above a bookstore cafe, its creaky floors and slanted ceilings a far cry from the polished chaos of San Francisco. The Willamette River flowed nearby, its surface rippling under the weight of the weather, a quiet companion to her new life. She worked long shifts at the cafe, her hands deftly pouring coffee and stacking pastries, but her heart was elsewhere, tucked into the pages of her notebook, where poems took shape under the dim glow of a bedside lamp. Her pregnancy had progressed, and with it came a fierce determination to protect the life growing inside her. She named her daughter Lila before she was born, whispering the name like a vow to keep her safe from the shadows that had driven Elena from the coast. Elena's days were a rhythm of routine and quiet rebellion. By day, she served customers with a warm smile, deflecting their small talk with practiced ease. By night, she wrote her poetry, sharper now, infused with the ache of leaving Lucas Grant behind, and the fear of the anonymous threat that had chased her here. Her poems, published under the pseudonym E. Ruiz, began to appear in local literary journals. They spoke of steel bridges arching over rivers, rain that washed away old sins, and a woman standing alone but unbroken. Readers in Portland's tight-knit art scene whispered about the mysterious poet, her words capturing the city's pulse, its grit, beauty, and relentless drizzle. Elena kept her identity hidden, wary of drawing attention that might lead back to San Francisco and the dangers she'd fled. Lila was born on a stormy spring night, her cries piercing the quiet of the hospital room. Elena held her daughter, marveling at the tiny hands and fierce eyes, and felt a deep love that scared her. Raising Lila alone was daunting. Sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, the constant juggle of work and childcare. But Elena found strength. She'd grown up navigating a world that often felt stacked against her, and that resilience carried her now. She read her poetry to Lila, soft verses about starlight and courage, hoping to plant seeds of fearlessness in her daughter's heart. The bookstore cafe's owner, a kind woman named Marjorie, let Elena bring Lila to work setting up a crib in the back room. The regulars adored Lila, cooing over her as Elena poured their lattes, but Elena never let her guard down. The memory of the anonymous email, "If you stay with him, your child won't be safe," lingered like a shadow, a reminder that safety was fragile. In San Francisco, Lucas Grant was fighting a different kind of battle. The Coastal Complex project, his vision of a legacy, was under siege. Claudia Reed's takeover campaign had intensified her team, sowing discord among investors with surgical precision. Board meetings were tense, filled with pointed questions about Lucas's leadership. He responded relentlessly, working late into the night, negotiating with stakeholders, and countering Claudia's moves with his own. But the rumors about his night with Elena, now months old, refused to die. Claudia's whispers had painted him as reckless, distracted by a fleeting romance. Lucas ignored the gossip, but it chipped away at his focus, leaving him hollow. He hadn't heard from Elena since she'd vanished. Her phone disconnected, her presence erased from the drifting bean. He'd returned to the coffee shop once, hoping to find her, but the new barista only shrugged when he asked. Her note, still in his wallet, was creased from being handled too often. Its words were a quiet ache he couldn't shake. Lucas threw himself into work to drown out the emptiness. The Coastal Complex was more than a project. It was his chance to build something lasting. Something his mother, who'd left when he was a child, would have been proud of. But late at night, when the city's lights blurred through his penthouse windows, his thoughts drifted to Elena. Her poetry, her laughter, how she'd looked at him, like he was more than his wealth. He wondered where she'd gone, why she'd left without a word. A part of him wanted to search for her, but pride and the relentless demands of his company kept him rooted. Claudia's shadow loomed larger, her green eyes glinting triumphantly at every misstep he made. She'd hinted at knowing more about Elena's disappearance, but Lucas dismissed it as another of her games. He couldn't afford to let her get under his skin. Elena, meanwhile, was carving out a life in Portland. Her poetry gained traction, and each publication was a small victory. She read at open mics, her voice steady, as she shared verses about rivers that carried secrets and women who built homes from ashes. Lila, now a toddler, would sit in the audience clapping with chubby hands, unaware of the weight her mother carried. Elena never spoke of Lucas, but he haunted her poem's lines about a man lost in a city of glass, chasing dreams that burned too bright. She wondered if he'd moved on, if he'd forgotten her. The anonymous email had stopped, but its threat kept her vigilant. She avoided social media, kept her life small, and checked the locks on her apartment door twice every night. The distance between them grew not just in miles, but in the lives they were building. Lucas's world was full of power and betrayal, where every handshake hid an agenda. Elena's was quieter, grounded in the daily grind of motherhood and the slow, steady rise of her voice as a poet. Yet both felt the pull of their shared night, a moment that had changed them in ways they couldn't articulate. Elena saw Lucas in Lila's eyes, a reminder of what she'd left behind. Lucas saw Elena, in every quiet moment, a ghost he couldn't outrun. Neither knew that fate or Claudia's machinations would soon draw them back together, forcing them to face the secrets they'd buried. Portland's riverside glowed under a rare, clear sky, the Willamette reflecting the last rays of a fading sun. Lucas Grant stepped off a private jet, his suit slightly rumpled from the flight, his mind on the deal that had brought him here. His company was expanding, and Portland's growing tech scene made it the perfect spot for a new riverfront complex. This smaller but ambitious project could cement his legacy beyond San Francisco. He'd been working non-stop, fending off Claudia Reed's latest attempts to undermine him. But the weight of those battles felt heavier now. The years had worn on him, each victory tinged with a loneliness he couldn't name. Still tucked in his wallet, Elena Ruiz's note was a relic of a night he couldn't forget, though he'd long since stopped hoping to find her. Elena, now a fixture in Portland's literary scene, worked at a cozy bookstore cafe called River's Edge. Her poetry, published as E. Ruiz, had found a devoted following, her words painting the city in shades of steel and rain. She balanced her shifts with raising Lila, who was now 4, a bright, curious girl with a laugh that could light up a room. Elena's life was steady, if not easy, motherhood work, and writing filled her days, leaving little room for the past. But Lucas lingered in her thoughts, a quiet ache she buried in her poems. She kept Lila's existence a secret, not out of shame, but out of fear. The anonymous email from years ago, still a shadow in her mind. She'd built a life she could control here, and she wasn't ready to let it unravel. Lucas's visit to Portland was all business. He spent the morning in meetings, shaking hands with city officials and investors, his charm masking the exhaustion that clung to him. By afternoon, he needed a break. Wandering the city's streets, he was drawn to River's Edge, its warm lights spilling onto the sidewalk. He stepped inside, the scent of coffee and old books wrapping around him like a memory. Behind the counter, Elena was steaming milk, her movements fluid, her face focused. Lucas froze, his breath catching. It was her, unmistakably her. The years had changed her subtly, her features sharper, her presence more grounded. But it was Elena. He stood rooted to the spot, the noise of the cafe fading as he watched her. Elena felt his gaze before she saw him. She looked up, her hands stilling on the espresso machine. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world stopped. Lucas's familiar frame, his intense blue eyes brought back a flood of memories. The night by the sea, the laughter, the way he'd listened to her poetry, like it was the only thing that mattered. She forced a neutral smile, her heart racing. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Lucas blinked, caught off guard by her calm. "Just coffee." Blackie managed, stepping closer to the counter. The air between them crackled heavy with unspoken questions. They talked briefly, and the exchange was polite, but strained. Lucas asked how she'd been, his tone careful, as if testing the waters. Elena kept her answers short, mentioning the cafe and her poetry, but she said nothing about Lila. She could feel the pull of him, the same electricity from their first night, but she held back. He reminded her of a life she'd fled, of threats and secrets she couldn't risk exposing. Lucas, sensing her distance, didn't push. He wanted to ask why she'd left and cut him off, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he thanked her for the coffee and left his mind reeling. Seeing her again had cracked something open in him, a longing he'd buried under work and ambition. Over the next few days, Lucas found excuses to return to River's Edge. He'd order coffee, sit in a corner with his laptop, and steal glances at Elena. She noticed her resolve wavering each time their eyes met. The attraction was still there, undeniable, but so was her fear. Lila was her world, and letting Lucas back in meant risking the safety she'd fought for. She didn't know if he was still tied to the dangerous world she'd left, or if Claudia Reed's shadow still followed him. But the more he came, the harder it was to keep him at arm's length. He was different now, quieter, more guarded, but his presence stirred something she'd tried to forget. One evening, Lucas stayed late, catching Elena as she closed up. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. She hesitated, then nodded, locking the door behind the last customer. They sat at a small table, the cafe dark except for a single lamp. Lucas spoke first, his words halting. "I never stopped thinking about you." Why did you leave? Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him about the email about Lila, but the words caught. Instead, she said, "I had to protect myself. Your world. It's not mine." Lucas leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. "It could be," he said softly, "if you'd let it." The moment hung between them, fragile and charged. Elena felt the pull to close the distance, to let herself fall back into him. But Lila's face flashed in her mind. She stood breaking the spell. "I can't," she said, her voice firm. "Not now." Lucas nodded, his jaw tight, and left without another word. Elena watched him go, her heart heavy with what she couldn't say. She didn't know that Lucas was already piecing together the gaps in her story, or that Claudia's investigators, still watching from afar, had noted his visits to the cafe. The past was catching up, and neither Lucas nor Elena was ready for the collision that awaited. Portland's autumn air carried a crisp edge, the city's trees ablaze with reds and golds along the Willamette River. Elena Ruiz had carved out a steady rhythm at River's Edge, the bookstore cafe, where she poured coffee daily and wove poetry by night. Her daughter Lila, now 4, was a whirlwind of curiosity, her laughter filling their small apartment. Elena's poems, published under the pseudonym E. Ruiz, had gained a quiet but growing following, their vivid imagery of bridges and rain resonating with readers. Yet the shadow of her past lingered, the anonymous email that had driven her from San Francisco, the memory of Lucas Grant, and the secret she guarded. Lila was his daughter. Lucas, meanwhile, was in Portland for his Riverfront Complex project, a smaller but ambitious venture that kept him tethered to the city. His visits to River's Edge had become a ritual, each cup of coffee a chance to glimpse Elena, though she kept him at a distance. Their brief conversations were polite, charged with unspoken history, but Elena never mentioned Lila. The pull between them was undeniable, a spark that refused to fade, but she couldn't risk letting him in. Not yet. Not when the threat from years ago still haunted her, its words etched in her mind. "If you stay with him, your child won't be safe." One evening, Lucas stumbled across an article in a local paper featuring a poem by E. Ruiz. The lines about a city of steel and secrets, a woman standing at the river's edge, felt achingly familiar. He recognized Elena's voice, her cadence, the way she wove longing into every word. The article mentioned an upcoming poetry reading at a community center, and Lucas felt a pull he couldn't ignore. He arrived early, slipping into the back of the dimly lit room where folding chairs were filled with locals, clutching coffee cups and worn paperbacks. Elena took the stage, her presence commanding her voice, weaving a spell. Lucas listened, captivated, as she read about a daughter who carried the stars in her eyes, a mother who built a world from words. Then he saw her. Lila sitting in the front row, her small frame perched on a chair, clapping with unrestrained joy. Her features struck him like a lightning bolt, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile like his own. His breath caught the pieces falling into place. Lila was his. The realization hit with awe and confusion, followed by questions. Why had Elena kept this from him? What had driven her away? He stayed through the reading, his eyes fixed on Lila. Then Elena, his mind racing. After the event, Lucas waited outside, his heart pounding, as Elena emerged holding Lila's hand. Lila was chatting about the poems, her voice bright, unaware of the storm brewing. Elena froze when she saw Lucas, her grip tightening on Lila's hand. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone sharp but low, shielding Lila from the tension. Lucas stepped closer, his voice steady but urgent. "She's mine, isn't she, Lila?" It wasn't a question. Elena's jaw tightened, her eyes searching his for a moment. before she nodded almost imperceptibly. "We need to talk," she said, glancing at Lila, who was distracted by a passing street performer. "But not here." They walked to a nearby park, Lila skipping ahead, chasing leaves. Under the shadow of an oak tree, Elena told him the truth. She spoke of the night they'd shared the pregnancy that followed the anonymous email that had terrified her into leaving San Francisco. "It said my child wouldn't be safe if I stayed with you," she said, her voice steady, but laced with pain. "I didn't know who sent it, but I couldn't take the chance. Your world, those deals, those enemies wasn't where I could raise her." Lucas listened, his chest tight, anger and guilt warring within him. He'd been so consumed by his work by Claudia's schemes that he hadn't seen the danger Elena faced. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice breaking. Elena met his gaze unflinching. "You were barely there, Lucas. You were fighting your battles, and I had to fight mine." Lila ran back, clutching a red leaf, oblivious to the weight of their words. Lucas knelt, smiling at her, his heart aching with a love he hadn't known he could feel. "She's beautiful," he said softly, looking at Elena. "Like her mother." Elena's expression softened, but her guard remained. "She's my world," she said, "and I'll do anything to keep her safe." Lucas nodded, understanding the depth of her resolve. He wanted to be part of their lives, but he saw the fear in Elena's eyes, the scars of a past she'd fled. He promised to give her space to prove he could be trusted. But the weight of their history hung heavy between them. As they parted, Lucas's mind churned. The email, the threat it pointed to Claudia. Her ruthless ambition, her obsession with control, made her the likely source. He vowed to uncover the truth, to protect Elena and Lila from whatever shadows still lingered. Watching him walk away, Elena felt a flicker of hope and dread. Letting Lucas in meant risking the life she'd built, but keeping him out meant denying Lila a father. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The Portland skyline shimmered under a rare winter sun, its bridges glinting like steel veins across the Willamette. Elena Ruiz stood behind the counter at River's Edge, her hands steady as she poured espresso, but her mind was elsewhere. Lucas Grant's discovery of Lila had cracked open the fragile balance she'd built. Their conversation in the park had left her raw, torn between the pull of their past and the need to protect her daughter. Lila, oblivious to the tension, played in the cafe's back room, her laughter a bright note in Elena's stormy thoughts. Her poetry, once a refuge, now felt like a mirror, reflecting the chaos she couldn't escape. She wrote late at night, her verses sharp with questions about trust and betrayal. Lucas, meanwhile, was unraveling. The revelation of Lila's existence had shifted something fundamental in him. He saw her in every quiet moment, her smile, her fearless energy, and it fueled a determination to be part of her life. But Elena's guardedness, her refusal to let him in, fully stung. He understood her fear, the threat that had driven her away, but it didn't ease the ache of being kept at arm's length. His days were split between Portland's riverfront project and quiet visits to River's Edge, where he hoped to catch Elena's eye to chip away at her walls. He also dug into the anonymous email and convinced Claudia Reed was behind it. His investigators were combing through digital trails, but Claudia was meticulous, her tracks well covered. The tension breaks when a local tabloid runs a story about Lucas and Elena, headlined "Billionaire's Secret Romance." It spun their reunion into a scandal, hinting that Elena was using Lucas to boost her poetry career. The article mentioned Lila, though not by name, calling her a hidden child that could derail Lucas's empire. Elena read it at the cafe, her hands shaking as she scanned the lies. Customers whispered their glances heavy with judgment. She felt exposed, and her carefully built life suddenly became public. Lucas, alerted by a colleague, stormed into River's Edge that afternoon, his face tight with anger. "I didn't leak this," he said before Elena could speak. "You have to believe me." She nodded, but her eyes were hard. "It doesn't matter who did it," she said. "It's out there now." Claudia, watching from San Francisco, had orchestrated the leak. Her investigators had tracked Lucas's visits to Portland, piecing together his connection to Elena and Lila. The tabloid was her opening salvo, a way to destabilize Lucas and paint Elena as a schemer. She fed the story to the press through a proxy, ensuring her name stayed clean. The board of Lucas's company, already skeptical of his focus, seized on the scandal. In a tense meeting, they questioned his judgment, accusing him of letting personal matters jeopardize the company. Lucas fought back, his voice sharp, but the pressure was mounting. Claudia's whispers had taken root, and even allies began to waver. That evening, Lucas went to Elena's apartment, desperate to clear the air. She let him in, but the space between them was thick with distrust. Lila was asleep, her toys scattered across the living room floor. Lucas paced, his frustration spilling over. "I'm trying to fix this, Elena," he said. "But you're shutting me out. Did you keep Lila from me to use her as leverage to pressure me?" The words slipped out, fueled by stress and the tabloid's poison, and he regretted them instantly. Elena's face hardened, her voice low but cutting. "You think I'd use my daughter like that, after everything I've done to keep her safe?" She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "You don't get to question me, Lucas. Not when I left everything to protect her from your world." The fight escalated, their voices rising despite the sleeping child nearby. Elena recounted the email, the fear that had driven her to Portland, the years of building a life alone. Lucas listened, his anger giving way to guilt, but the damage was done. "I can't do this," Elena said, her voice breaking. "You don't trust me, and I can't trust you. Stay away from Lila." Lucas stood frozen, the weight of her words crushing. He left without another word, the door closing softly behind him. Elena sat alone, tears falling as she clutched one of Lila's drawings. She'd fought so hard to protect her daughter, but now the past was clawing its way back. Driving through Portland's quiet streets, Lucas felt the sting of her rejection and a flicker of resolve. He'd been wrong to doubt her, and he'd make it right. He called his investigators, demanding they double down on tracing the email. He suspected Claudia, but he needed proof. The scandal had exposed more than their relationship. It had revealed the fragility of their trust, and Lucas knew he'd have to fight to rebuild it, not just for Elena, but for the daughter he'd only just found. Portland's winter rain fell in sheets, blurring the city's edges, as Elena Ruiz stood behind the counter at River's Edge. The bookstore cafe was quieter than usual, and the scandal about her and Lucas Grant was still rippling through whispered conversations among customers. Elena kept her head down, focusing on the hiss of the espresso machine, but her mind was a storm. The tabloid's lies, painting her as a manipulative poet, using Lucas for fame, had shaken her. But Lucas's accusation that she'd hidden Lila to control him cut deeper. She'd barred him from seeing their daughter. Her trust in him shattered, yet a part of her ached for the connection they'd once shared. Lila, oblivious to the drama, played in the back room, her laughter a lifeline Elena clung to. Elena wasn't one to retreat. The anonymous email from years ago, the tabloid hit the whispers. They all pointed to a calculated effort to keep her away from Lucas. She suspected Claudia Reed, the rival who'd haunted their past, but suspicion wasn't enough. Late at night, after Lila slept, Elena dug into online forums and public records, piecing together Claudia's connections. She found a thread on a tech gossip site, buried in comments mentioning a PR firm known for dirty tactics, one Claudia had reportedly used. It wasn't proof, but it was a start. Elena also contacted a journalist friend from Portland's literary scene who had contacts in San Francisco's business world. "I need to know who's behind this," she told him, her voice firm. "Someone's trying to ruin me, Meanwhile, Lucas was fighting his own battles. The board of his company, rattled by the scandal, was pushing for concessions to weaken his control over the riverfront project. Claudia's influence was evident. She'd seeded doubts about his leadership, leveraging the tabloid story to sway key investors. Lucas, however, was done playing defense. He hired a cybersecurity team to trace the anonymous email driving Elena away years ago, suspecting it was Claudia's work. The team uncovered a lead. The email had bounced through a server linked to a shell company tied to Claudia's network. It wasn't airtight, but enough to fuel Lucas's resolve. He also noticed a pattern in the tabloid leaks, the same PR firm Elena had flagged appearing in the shadows. Elena's poetry, meanwhile, became her weapon. A major literary magazine, the Willamette Review, offered to publish her following collection, a chance to cement her voice as E. Ruiz. The editor, a fan of her work, saw her poems as a commentary on power and resilience, unaware of how personal they were. Elena poured her anger into a new piece, The Puppeteer's Strings, a searing metaphor for manipulation in the world of wealth. She didn't name Claudia, but the poem's imagery, shadowy hands, pulling at a city's heart, was unmistakable. The magazine's offer was more than a career boost. It was a platform to stand as her own woman, not just Lucas's poet. She accepted knowing it would draw attention, perhaps even from her enemies. In San Francisco, Lucas prepared for a crucial board meeting that could decide the fate of his projects. He'd gathered evidence of Claudia's tactics, emails, financial trails, and witness accounts from former associates who'd turned on her. The boardroom was tense, the air thick with skepticism, as Claudia, poised and sharp, presented her case for taking over key aspects of the company. Lucas stood, his voice steady, and laid out his counterattack. He revealed the shell company's link to the anonymous email, the PR firm's role in the tabloid leaks, and Claudia's pattern of sabotage. "This isn't competition," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "It's sabotage." The room fell silent, the board members exchanging glances. Claudia's smile faltered but recovered quickly, denying everything with a practiced laugh. Elena in Portland got a break. Her journalist friend uncovered a former employee of the PR firm who was willing to talk. Disgruntled after being cut loose, the employee confirmed Claudia had ordered the tabloid story and hinted at earlier campaigns, including the anonymous email. Elena recorded the conversation, her hands shaking with triumph and fear. She didn't tell Lucas she wasn't ready to trust him again, but she sent the recording to a lawyer friend for safekeeping. The evidence was her shield, a way to protect Lila if Claudia struck again. The board meeting's fallout was swift. Lucas's evidence swayed enough members to stall Claudia's takeover, but it wasn't a clean victory. The board demanded that he resolve the personal distractions and focus on the company. Lucas agreed, but his mind was on Elena and Lila. He wanted to reach out to apologize for his accusation, but her words, "Stay away from Lila," echoed in his head. Instead, he sent her a text, earnest but straightforward. "I'm sorry. I'm fighting for you both." Elena read it, her heart twisting, but didn't reply. She wasn't ready to let him back in, not when the stakes felt so high. Elena's poem hit the magazine's pages, and its impact was immediate. Readers shared it online, praising its raw power, and some speculating about its targets. Scanning the news from her San Francisco office, Claudia recognized the subtext and seethed. Elena was no longer just a barista or a poet. She was a threat, her voice amplifying in ways Claudia hadn't anticipated. But Claudia wasn't done. She doubled down, preparing a new move to discredit Lucas and silence Elena. The battle was far from over, and both Elena and Lucas knew they were fighting not just for themselves, but for the family they might still become. The Portland skyline was shrouded in mist. The Willamette River, a quiet witness to the city's pulse. Elena Ruiz stood in her apartment staring at the pages of her upcoming poetry collection, her fingers tracing the words she'd poured her heart into. The magazine's publication of The Puppeteer's Strings had sparked a firestorm online, with readers dissecting its metaphors for corporate greed and hidden agendas. Elena knew the poem pointed at Claudia Reed, though she'd been careful not to name her. The attention was exhilarating, but dangerous. Claudia's reach was long, and Elena felt the weight of her unseen presence. Playing nearby with a stack of colorful blocks, Lila was her anchor, a reminder of why she fought. Lucas Grant, back in San Francisco, was navigating a different storm. The board meeting had bought him time, but Claudia's influence lingered, her allies still pushing for control. His evidence against her had shaken their confidence, but it wasn't enough to end her campaign. His fight with Elena haunted Lucas, his accusation that she'd used Lila as leverage burning in his memory. He wanted to fix things, to prove he could be the father Lila deserved, but Elena's silence was a wall he couldn't breach. His investigators were closing in on Claudia's network, uncovering more about the PR firm and its dirty tactics. But the process was slow, and the clock was ticking. Claudia, sensing the tide turning, struck back. She took the stage at a high-profile industry event, her voice smooth, as she addressed a room of investors and media. She said, "Lucas Grant is a visionary, and her smile is sharp, but personal entanglements can blind visionaries." She didn't name Elena, but the implication was clear. Then she dropped a bombshell, her words carefully chosen. "I know what it's like to care for him, to be pushed aside. He did it to me years ago, and now he's repeating history." The room buzzed, reporters scribbling furiously. Claudia revealed she'd once loved Lucas only to be rejected coldly, a betrayal that fueled her ambition. She painted him as a man who discarded people, drawing a parallel to his abandonment of Elena. The story exploded online, tabloids spinning Claudia's confession into a narrative of Lucas's heartlessness. But she wasn't done. She leaked a private detail to a select few journalists. Lucas's mother had left him as a child, a wound he rarely spoke of. The articles framed him as damaged, unstable, a man doomed to repeat his mother's abandonment with Elena, and by extension Lila. Lucas read the stories in his penthouse, his hands clenched into fists. The mention of his mother was a low blow, ripping open a scar he'd buried for years. He remembered her leaving the empty house, the silence that followed. Claudia's attack wasn't just business. It was personal, a calculated strike at his core. Elena, who was in Portland, saw the articles too. The parallels to her departure hit hard. She'd left to protect Lila, not to hurt Lucas. But the media twisted it into a pattern. She felt sympathy for him, imagining the boy he'd been abandoned by his mother. But her anger lingered, his accusations still raw. She focused on her poetry, preparing for a reading to launch her collection. The event was at a local theater, a bigger stage than she was used to, and the buzz around her work drew a crowd. She didn't know Lucas was in the audience, having flown in quietly, desperate to see her, to understand the woman she'd become. Elena's voice filled the room at the reading, her poems weaving stories of resilience and defiance. Lucas sat in the back, Lila's absence, a quiet ache. She was with a sitter, Elena's way of keeping her safe from the spotlight. When Elena read The Puppeteer's Strings, the crowd leaned in, captivated by its raw power. Lucas felt the weight of her words, knowing they pointed at Claudia, but also at him, at the world he'd pulled her into. After the reading, he approached her backstage, his expression raw. He said, "I didn't know about my mother in the press until today. Claudia's trying to break me. But I'm not her, and I'm not my mother." Elena's heart wavered, but her resolve held. "I'm not her either," she said, her voice steady. "I left to protect Lila, but I'm here now. I'm not running. But I need you to trust me. Lucas, not just fight for me." Her words hit him hard, a challenge to prove himself beyond his wealth and power. He nodded, promising to try, but the distance between them remained. Claudia's revelations had exposed his past, but they'd also forced Elena to confront her choices. She'd chosen to stay in Portland to fight for her voice, but letting Lucas in meant risking the safety she'd built. As Lucas left the theater, his phone buzzed with a message from his investigators. They'd found a direct link between Claudia and the PR firm, including a payment for the anonymous email. The evidence was mounting, but Claudia's latest move had shifted the game. By exposing his past, she'd made it personal, and Lucas knew the fight was no longer just about business. It was about family trust and the chance to heal wounds neither he nor Elena could outrun. Portland's winter chill settled over the city, and the Willamette River reflected a sky heavy with clouds. After a long shift, Elena Ruiz locked the door of River's Edge, her thoughts tangled with the weight of recent weeks. The success of her poetry collection, published under the pseudonym E. Ruiz, had elevated her voice, but the spotlight came with risks. Claudia Reed's media attacks had painted Elena as a schemer, and though Lucas Grant had sworn to fight the lies, their last conversation, fraught with his plea for trust, left her guarded. Lila, her daughter, was her anchor, a bright spark in a world growing darker. Elena checked her phone as she walked home, her heart sinking at a news alert. Another tabloid piece, this time hinting at her dangerous influence over Lucas's business decisions. She knew Claudia was behind it, tightening the noose. Lucas pored over reports from his cybersecurity team in a Portland hotel suite. They'd confirmed Claudia's link to the anonymous email driving Elena from San Francisco years ago, tracing payments to a shadowy PR firm. The evidence was solid, but not enough to take Claudia down publicly. She was too careful, her tracks buried under layers of proxies. Lucas's board was growing restless, their faith in him shaken by the relentless media storm. He wanted to protect Elena and Lila, to prove he was more than the man who doubted her, but the fight wore him thin. Every step forward seemed to pull him deeper into Claudia's web. The crisis erupted on a Tuesday afternoon. Elena had dropped Lila off at her preschool, a small building nestled among Portland's brick-lined streets. She was at River's Edge, steaming milk for a latte, when her phone buzzed with a call from the school. "Lila's gone." The teacher's voice trembled. She was in the playground, and then she wasn't. Elena's world tilted. She grabbed her coat, her hands shaking as she called the police. Her voice steady, despite the panic clawing at her chest. The preschool was in chaos when she arrived, teachers searching, parents whispering, police already on the scene. A grainy security video showed a figure in a hooded jacket, leading Lila away, her small hand trusting in theirs. Elena's knees buckled, but she forced herself to stand, her mind racing to one name: Claudia. Lucas was in a meeting with investors when Elena's call came. Her voice, raw with fear, hit him like a punch. "Lila's been taken," she said. And before she could finish, he was out the door, promising to be there. He called his security team, a private firm he'd hired to dig into Claudia's moves, and gave them the preschool's address. Driving through Portland's rain-slicked streets, he replayed their last fight, his accusation that she'd hidden Lila to manipulate him. Guilt gnawed at him, but so did resolve. He wouldn't lose his daughter. Not now. Not ever. Elena and Lucas met at the preschool, the air between them tense but focused. The police were combing the area, but Elena's instincts screamed that this wasn't random. She showed Lucas the latest tabloid article, its veiled threats about her dangerous ties to him. "This is Claudia," she said, her voice low, fierce. "She's been after me since San Francisco." Lucas nodded, his jaw tight. His security team had intercepted a message from the PR firm hinting at a disruption planned for Portland. It wasn't proof of kidnapping, but it was close enough. "We'll find her," he promised, meeting Elena's eyes. For the first time, she saw not just the billionaire fighting for control, but a father desperate to protect his child. They worked together, a fragile alliance born of necessity. Lucas's team traced the hooded figure's vehicle to a rental, registered under a false name, linked to a shell company, tied to Claudia's network. The police followed the lead, but Elena couldn't sit still. She remembered a detail from her journalist friend's tip, a warehouse on Portland's outskirts, used by the PR firm for off-the-books operations. She shared it with Lucas, who relayed it to his team. They drove to the warehouse, a crumbling building by the river, its windows dark. The police were minutes behind, but Elena's heart pounded with urgency. She thought of Lila's laugh, her fearless curiosity, and the thought of her in danger fueled a strength she hadn't known she had. Inside the warehouse, they found Lila unharmed, but scared, sitting in a corner with a woman who matched the hooded figure's description. Lucas's security team moved fast, restraining the woman before she could flee. Lila ran to Elena, her small arms wrapping around her mother's neck. Elena held her tight, tears streaming her body, trembling with relief. Lucas stood nearby, his eyes locked on Lila, a mix of love and rage in his expression. The police arrived, arresting the woman who refused to talk, but carried a burner phone with a single number linked to Claudia's PR firm. Elena's strength shone in that moment. She wasn't just a mother saving her child. She was a woman who'd faced down fear and refused to break. Lucas saw it, his admiration deepening. "I'm sorry," he said later, as they sat in the police station, Lila asleep in Elena's arms, "for doubting you, for everything." Elena nodded, her guard still up but softening. "We got her back," she said. "That's what matters." But both knew the fight wasn't over. Claudia's shadow loomed, and the evidence from the warehouse was a thread they could pull to unravel her empire or spark her retaliation. Portland's dawn broke cold and gray, the city waking under a blanket of mist. Elena Ruiz sat at her kitchen table, Lila coloring nearby, her small hands busy with crayons. The kidnapping had left Elena shaken but resolute. The warehouse incident had yielded evidence: a burner phone, a rental car receipt, a voice recording from Lucas's security team that pointed to Claudia Reed's PR firm. It wasn't enough to tie Claudia directly to the crime, but it was a crack in her armor. Elena knew she couldn't stop now. Her poetry, once a private refuge, had become a weapon, and she was ready to wield it. She'd drafted a new poem, The Cost of Strings, a raw indictment of power and manipulation, set to be published in a national outlet. She didn't name Claudia, but the subtext was clear: a call to expose those who hid behind wealth and lies. Lucas Grant was in overdrive. His hotel suite was a command center for security and legal teams. The kidnapping had shifted everything: Lila's safety, Elena's trust, his own sense of purpose, all were on the line. His investigators had traced the warehouse suspect to a low-level operative in Claudia's network, a hired hand who'd cracked under questioning, admitting the PR firm had paid her to scare Elena. The burner phone's call log led to a middleman, not Claudia herself, but the money trail was closing in. Lucas knew Claudia was too bright to leave a direct link, but he had enough to make her sweat. He also knew the board was watching, their patience thinning. If he didn't end this soon, his company and chance at a family could slip away. Lucas mobilized every resource. His security team worked with the police, who were now investigating Claudia's firm for kidnapping and fraud. He called in favors from industry allies, securing testimony from former associates who'd seen Claudia's dirty tactics firsthand. The evidence was mounting: bank records, encrypted emails, and a leaked memo outlining a disruption campaign targeting Lucas and Elena. Lucas prepared for a final confrontation, not in a boardroom, but in the court of public opinion. He shared the evidence with a trusted journalist, eager to break the story. But first he needed to see Elena to ensure she was ready for what came next. Elena, meanwhile, was done hiding. The national outlet, The Atlantic Current, published The Cost of Strings online, and the response was electric. Readers shared it widely, its imagery of a city strangled by invisible hands striking a chord. Activists and commentators linked it to corporate corruption, some speculating about real-world parallels. Claudia, reading it in her San Francisco office, recognized the threat. Elena wasn't just a poet. She was a voice that could sway public perception, a danger Claudia hadn't anticipated. Furious, she ordered her team to double down, planning a smear campaign to discredit Elena as unstable, a desperate mother fabricating stories. Lucas met Elena at River's Edge after closing the cafe dark, except for a single lamp. Lila was with a trusted sitter, giving them space to talk. "We're close," Lucas said, laying out the evidence bank records, the operative's confession, the memo. "We can end this, but it's going to get ugly." Elena nodded, her jaw set. "I'm ready," she said, showing him her poem's impact online. "People are listening. Let's use it." They agreed to coordinate. Lucas would push the evidence to the press, while Elena's poetry would amplify the narrative, framing Claudia's actions as a betrayal of trust in the financial world. The plan unfolded swiftly. The journalist broke the story, a damning exposé linking Claudia's firm to the kidnapping, the anonymous email, and the tabloid leaks. The article cited Lucas's evidence and quoted Elena's poem, tying it to a broader call for accountability. Social media erupted, and hashtags like #CostOfStrings trended as readers connected the dots. Claudia's empire began to crumble. Investors pulled out, her board allies distanced themselves, and regulators opened an investigation. The kidnapping charge, though, not yet directly tied to her caste. A long shadow, her reputation unraveling. Claudia fought back, issuing a statement denying everything, claiming she was a victim of Lucas's vendetta. But the tide had turned. Elena's poem, paired with the exposé, had shifted public perception, painting Claudia as a manipulator who'd endangered a child. Lucas's board, once skeptical, rallied behind him, impressed by his handling of the crisis. He didn't gloat. His focus was on Elena and Lila. He visited them at the cafe and found Elena reading to Lila, her voice soft but firm. "We did it," he said, a rare smile breaking through. Elena met his gaze, her guard lowering. "We're not done," she said, but her tone held a hint of hope. Claudia's downfall was sealed when the operative turned state's evidence implicating a senior aide in her firm. The aide, facing jail time, pointed to Claudia's orders. It wasn't a conviction yet, but enough to end her influence. Elena's poetry collection, now in bookstores, became a symbol of resistance, her voice echoing beyond Portland. Watching her read at a packed event, Lucas felt a surge of pride and a longing to build something real with her and Lila. The fight had cost them, but it had also forged a bond they weren't ready to name, but couldn't ignore. Portland's spring breeze carried the scent of blooming cherry blossoms, softening the city's edges as Elena Ruiz walked through a park, with Lila, her daughter's small hand tucked in hers. The past months had been a whirlwind. Claudia Reed's downfall, sparked by the exposé, and Elena's poem had shifted the ground beneath them. The national outlet's article and Lucas Grant's evidence had dismantled Claudia's empire. Her firm faced investigations for kidnapping and fraud, contracts evaporated, and her once loyal allies scattered. The operative who'd taken Lila had turned state's evidence implicating a senior aide who, under pressure, pointed to Claudia's orders. It wasn't a conviction yet, but the damage was done. Claudia's name was toxic, her influence shattered. Elena felt the weight of her victory, but it came with scars. The kidnapping had left her hypervigilant, checking locks twice, scanning crowds for threats. Resilient Lila seemed untouched, her laughter bright as she chased butterflies in the park. Elena's poetry collection, now on bookstore shelves, had become a quiet phenomenon, its verses about resilience and power resonating far beyond Portland. Critics hailed E. Ruiz as a voice of defiance, unaware of the personal battles behind her words. Elena relished the recognition. But it was bittersweet. She'd fought to protect Lila, to claim her own space. And now she stood as a poet in her own right, no longer defined by Lucas or Claudia's schemes. Lucas, back in San Francisco, was rebuilding too. The board, once skeptical, now praised his handling of the crisis. The riverfront project in Portland was moving forward, and his coastal complex in San Francisco had regained investor confidence. But success felt hollow without Elena and Lila. He'd kept his distance since the kidnapping, respecting Elena's need for space, but their last meeting at River's Edge lingered in his mind. Her strength, the way she'd stood firm through fear, had deepened his respect and his longing. He wanted to be part of their lives, not as a billionaire fixing problems, but as a partner, a father. His mother's abandonment, exposed by Claudia's cruel leak, still stung, but Elena's words, "I'm not her," had given him hope. He was determined to prove he could be trusted. Elena, meanwhile, was navigating her new reality. The literary world embraced her with invitations to read at festivals and universities. She accepted a few, balancing them with her shifts at River's Edge and time with Lila. The cafe's owner, Marjorie, had become a friend, offering flexibility, so Elena could juggle motherhood and her rising career. But the attention brought challenges. Reporters dug into her past, some linking her to Lucas, others speculating about Lila's father. Elena deflected with grace, focusing on her work, but the questions stirred doubts. Could she let Lucas in without risking the life she'd built? Was he ready to be a father, not just a savior? Lucas made his move quietly. He flew to Portland, not for business, but for Elena. He arrived at River's Edge on a quiet afternoon, the cafe nearly empty. Elena was wiping down tables, her hair loose, her expression soft until she saw him. "What do you want?" "Lucas?" she asked, her tone wary, but not cold. He held up his hands, a gesture of peace. "To talk. About us. About Lila." He spoke carefully, laying out his regrets, his accusation distance, and failure to see her fear years ago. "I want to be in her life," he said. "In yours, if you'll let me. Not as a fix, but as family." Elena listened, her heart torn. She saw sincerity in his eyes, but trust was hard-won. "It's not just about you and me," she said. "It's about her. She's been through enough." They agreed to start small. Lucas began visiting Lila at the park, supervised by Elena. Their interactions were tentative, but warm. Curious and fearless, Lila took to him quickly, asking him to push her on the swings, her giggles breaking the tension. Elena watched her guard softening as she saw Lucas's gentleness and patience. He didn't push for more than she offered, and that restraint began to rebuild what their fight had broken. Seeing Lucas's focus return, the board backed his projects fully, but he made changes, delegating more, carving out time to be in Portland. He was rewriting his life, prioritizing the family he'd only just found. Elena's poetry became her voice in this new chapter. At a reading in a packed Portland theater, she shared a new poem, "The Rebuilt City," about a woman reclaiming her ground after a storm. The crowd, including Lucas, sat rapt, hearing her strength, her survival. Critics began calling her a cultural force, and her work was taught in local schools. Her name was no longer tied to scandal, but to art. She was no longer Lucas's poet or Claudia's target. She was E. Ruiz, a name that stood alone. As she stepped off the stage, Lucas met her backstage. Lila, asleep in his arms, after sneaking in to watch. "You're incredible," he said, his voice low. Elena smiled, a flicker of warmth breaking through. She said, "We're figuring this out," and for the first time, she believed it. Claudia's collapse was complete when regulators froze her firm's assets, pending a full investigation. Her name, once synonymous with power, became a cautionary tale. Elena and Lucas, though scarred, were emerging stronger, their bond forged in the fire of their fight. Lila, oblivious to the stakes, drew pictures of her new friend Lucas. Her innocence, a reminder of what they'd fought for. The shadows were lifting, but Elena knew they'd never entirely vanish. She was ready, her voice and her love for Lila, her greatest weapons. San Francisco's coastline sparkled under a golden sunset, the bay alive with the rhythm of waves. Elena Ruiz stood on a grassy hill, overlooking the water, her poetry notebook tucked under her arm, Lila's hand in hers. A year had passed since Claudia Reed's downfall, and the scars of that battle were fading, replaced by a tentative hope. Elena had returned to San Francisco, not as the barista who'd fled, but as E. Ruiz, a poet whose voice resonated across cities. Her collection, now a bestseller, was taught in classrooms, its verses about resilience and redemption, striking a universal chord. Lila, now 5, skipped beside her, her chatter about seashells and seagulls, a melody that grounded Elena's heart. Lucas Grant had changed too. He'd scaled back his role in his company, delegating major decisions to trusted executives, freeing himself to focus on what mattered, Elena and Lila. The coastal complex, his once consuming dream, was thriving, but it no longer defined him. He'd bought a house in San Francisco, a modern but warm space, with expansive windows and a garden for Lila to play in. He and Elena were cautious, building their relationship step by step, but the trust they'd lost was slowly returning. They weren't a couple yet, but a family bound by Lila and a shared determination to move forward. The move to San Francisco had been Elena's choice, a leap of faith after months of Lucas proving himself. His time in Portland, pushing Lila on swings, reading her bedtime stories, had shown Elena a man willing to earn his place. She'd watched him falter, apologize, and try again, his patience chipping away at her doubts. Lila adored him, calling him Papa Lucas with a giggle that made Elena's heart ache. They'd agreed to co-parent, living separately, but closed their lives intertwined through Lila's school runs and weekend outings. Elena kept her independence, working part-time at a local bookstore while writing, and her career flourished with invitations to speak and teach. Tonight was special, a poetry reading on the beach organized by a San Francisco arts collective. The event was outdoors, a stage set against the backdrop of crashing waves, fairy lights strung between driftwood poles. Elena was the headliner, her name drawing a crowd of local students and fans. Lucas and Lila were in the front row, Lila clutching a notebook where she'd scribbled her own poems, strings of words about stars and her new home. Elena took the stage, her presence steady, her voice carrying over the wind. She read from her collection poems about rivers that had secrets, cities rebuilt from ashes, and love that endured through storms. The crowd listened, wrapped their applause warm against the cool evening air. Then Lila surprised them. She tugged at Lucas's sleeve, whispering, "I want to read mine." He hesitated, glancing at Elena, who nodded from the stage, a smile breaking through her focus. Lila climbed up her small frame, dwarfed by the microphone, and read in a clear, brave voice. "My house has light. The door is open. Mama and Papa." Lucas held hands. The words were simple, a child's vision of family, but they hit Elena and Lucas like a wave. The crowd clapped, some wiping tears, as Lila beamed, unaware of the weight her poem carried. Elena joined her, lifting her daughter into her arms, her eyes meeting Lucas's over Lila's head. The world was just them for a moment, their family, their light. After the reading, they stayed by the shore, Lila running along the sand, chasing the tide. Lucas and Elena sat on a blanket, the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. "She's something else," Lucas said, watching Lila like her mother. Elena laughed a sound that felt lighter than it had in years. "She's got you in her too," she said. That fearlessness. They talked about the future, not grand plans, but small ones. Lila's school play a weekend hike, a possible trip to Portland to visit River's Edge. They didn't name what they were becoming, but the ease between them spoke volumes. Claudia's shadow was gone. Her firm dismantled her name, a footnote in corporate scandals. The investigations had led to charges. Though she'd fled to Europe, her fate uncertain. Elena and Lucas didn't dwell on her. They'd won not just against her, but for themselves. Elena's poetry was her legacy, a voice that had risen from pain to power. Lucas's projects thrived, but his true legacy was the family he was building one moment at a time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Lila ran back sand on her cheeks and threw herself into their arms. The crowd's applause echoed in the distance, a reminder of the journey they'd survived. Together, they walked toward the lights of their new home. The door always open, the future unwritten, but bright.